When we think about human history and the building of these great empires, we usually picture the obvious tools of conquest.
Right, like swords and
Yeah,
shields.
exactly. Swords, grand architecture, or maybe, the invention of gunpowder. But today, we're looking at a completely different tool of empire. And honestly, it is one that makes most people instinctively cross their legs and wince.
Oh, absolutely.
We've got this really fascinating kind of sprawling set of historical illustrations and records laid out in front of us for this deep dive, and they all center on one profound, frankly uncomfortable subject, which is the deep, complex history and politics of castration.
It is definitely a visceral topic. I mean, there's just no getting around that initial reaction.
No, there really isn't.
But, if we can strip away that immediate physical cringe, we are actually left with a surprisingly clear lens through which to view human history. Like looking through these illustrations we have here, going from ancient clay tablets all the way to 19th century medical diagrams, we are going to explore exactly why this practice existed almost everywhere. Right.
And across drastically different cultures for, well, over 3,000 years.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because to really understand how castration eventually built and sustained these vast empires, we can't start in the marble palaces, right? We have to start in the dirt.
Literally in the dirt, yeah.
Yeah. Looking at this first set of historical records, we're going all the way back to the Stone Age.
Right, so about 10,000 years ago, archaeologists actually call this the secondary products revolution.
The secondary products revolution.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, early agrarian and pastoral societies were fundamentally changing how they managed their animals. Initially, if you domesticated, say, cattle or sheep, you mostly just did it to kill them for meat.
Or maybe to get some milk.
Exactly. But eventually, these societies realized they needed to retain male livestock long-term for secondary products. Specifically, they needed them alive for their wool and for the heavy traction labor you need to pull plows.
Which, that sounds great in theory. But as anyone who has actually been around farm animals knows, keeping a massive herd of fully intact, aggressive male bulls or rams around it is just a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it's impossible. I mean, you can't control the breeding programs, and you're just constantly dealing with extreme aggression.
Right.
But they discovered a biological workaround. They figured out that if they removed the tests of these male animals, it didn't just prevent them from breeding, it actually fundamentally altered their behavioral biology.
Wow.
Yeah, the castrated animals became noticeably calmer, they were more predictable, much more docile.
It's basically the difference between trying to herd a pack of wild wolves versus a pack of golden retrievers.
That's actually a great way to put it.
You strip away the testosterone,
Okay.
and you get a compliant workforce. But, and here's the terrifying leap, the records show that eventually that exact same agricultural logic gets applied to human beings.
Yes, it does.
Like, there's a translation here from ancient cuneiform hymns found in the city of Uruk in Mesopotamia, and this dates back to around 4000 BCE.
Which is incredibly early.
Yeah, they are some of the earliest definitive written records of human castration we have. And the primary targets in these records were prisoners of war.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, you really have to look at the cold, hard calculus of ancient warfare.
The logistics of it.
Exactly. When a city-state captures an enemy combatant, they face a really severe dilemma. I mean, if you execute that prisoner, you are just throwing away this incredibly valuable potential labor.
Right, but on the flip side, if you just enslave a fully intact, highly trained male warrior, you're basically sitting on a powder keg.
A huge risk.
You have a constant daily threat of violent rebellion. Plus, there's the risk of him producing future generations of enemies right inside your own city walls.
Exactly. So what did they do? They applied the logic of the pasture to the prison camp. By castrating these captured warriors, they achieved multiple goals all at once.
That's essentially this brutal form of bioengineering. They were treating rival human beings exactly like livestock to intentionally engineer a subservient underclass.
Yeah.
By physically removing a man's reproductive capacity, they completely stripped away his legal standing as a patriarch. They just erased his social authority.
It permanently fixed him in a subjugated role. And this is really the crucial pivot point here. This was the exact moment castration evolved from just a simple physical act of violence into a highly sophisticated political technology.
A political technology.
Yes, the creation of a biologically dependent, socially isolated servant. That's the exact dynamic that sets the stage for how this practice would be weaponized by the most powerful royal courts in human history.
Which raises a really interesting question for me. Like, how does a brutal method of prisoner control become the ultimate resume builder for royal bureaucrats?
Right, this seems like quite the jump.
Because looking at these later historical illustrations, we literally see eunuchs standing right next to emperors, dripping in silk and gold.
Well, it comes down to two things, loyalty and legacy. The term eunuch itself actually comes from the Greek words oinon ekain, which literally translates to bed guard.
Bed guard.
Yeah, which points directly to their early specialized social functions in guarding the royal or aristocratic women's quarters.
Because obviously, since they couldn't procreate, a king didn't have to worry about his bed guard sleeping with the queen and, corrupting the royal bloodline.
Precisely. They were entirely non-threatening to the dynastic succession. Because, think about it, a king's biggest fear isn't just a random assassin, it's a rival dynasty.
No, that makes sense.
A eunuch cannot father children. Therefore, he literally cannot build a rival family legacy. His entire wealth, his status, his very survival are all intrinsically tied to the specific ruler he serves.
So they become the ultimate, uncompromisingly loyal servants.
Exactly.
But different empires actually utilize this political technology in incredibly specific, different ways. Like, take the Byzantine Empire.
Oh, the Byzantines are fascinating here.
Yeah, looking at the accounts of Emperor Leo VI, castration wasn't just about making loyal servants. It was actively used as a political weapon against rivals to the throne.
And the mechanism behind that is deeply, deeply rooted in Byzantine ideology. In their worldview, the emperor wasn't just a political leader. He was viewed as a literal reflection of heavenly authority and divine perfection on earth.
So he had to be perfect.
Right. Therefore, the law strictly dictated that a blemished or physically mutilated man could never, under any circumstances, sit on the throne.
Oh, wow. Okay, so if I'm a Byzantine emperor and I have this really popular rival, if I just assassinate him, I risk turning him into a martyr, right? I could spark a massive civil war.
Absolutely.
But if I capture him and castrate him...
You've legally and ideologically checkmated him.
Wow.
He is permanently disqualified from power. But he's still alive, so his followers have absolutely no martyr to rally behind. It was a politically bloodless way to permanently neutralize a major threat.
That is just ruthlessly efficient. But then if we look over at the illustrations from ancient Egypt and Assyria, the framework changes entirely.
It really does.
Here, we see it used strictly as a punitive measure, like specifically as a really severe punishment for crimes like rape. And the legal justification they wrote down is incredibly revealing.
It tells you exactly how they viewed biology.
Yeah, they stated the punishment was designed to address 3 specific evils: insult, corruption of morals, and confusion of offspring.
And that phrase, confusion of offspring, is really the key to understanding ancient biology here. Many of these societies believe that moral character, or even like a person's fundamental essence, was carried physically through reproduction.
So it wasn't just a metaphor for them.
No, not at all. By permanently altering the part of the body used to commit the crime, the state wasn't just exacting revenge. They actually believed they were physically cutting off the transmission of corrupted morals to future generations.
Man. But here is where it gets really interesting to me. Because as much as it was used as a punishment, or, a tool of disqualification, we really have to look at the records from imperial China.
Yes, China is a completely different story.
Because in ancient China, castration started out as one of the 5 punishments under ancient law, alongside things like tattooing or amputating the nose.
Right, it was purely penal.
But over the centuries, it morphed into something entirely different. It became a highly sought-after path for socioeconomic advancement.
It is genuinely one of the most profound paradoxes in all of human history. You have a society where men would voluntarily undergo the complete removal of their genitalia just to gain a government position.
Wait, hold on. I need to stop you there. You're telling me men willingly subjected themselves to this?
Yes, they did.
Without modern anesthesia, just to get a job in the bureaucracy? Like, how bad was the alternative?
Well, for a lot of peasants, the alternative was literally slow starvation. But it wasn't just about basic survival, it was about proximity to absolute power. And we should clarify a fairly brutal anatomical detail here.
Okay.
In imperial China, this procedure almost always meant full ablation.
Meaning the removal of everything.
Yeah.
The entire male sexual organ, not just the testes.
Yes. Everything. They endured this agonizing, frequently deadly procedure specifically to gain access to the emperor's inner circle. Because Chinese society was so deeply rooted in Confucian family structures, filial piety and all that.
Right. Family was everything.
Exactly. So a man who voluntarily severed his ability to ever have a family was making the ultimate, undeniable sacrifice to the emperor.
And there are illustrations here of these specific jars, right, kept on high shelves in the palaces,
The treasure houses, yes.
right, where the eunuchs would carefully preserve their severed parts in these jars of alcohol. Because culturally, they believed they had to be buried completely whole to pass into the afterlife intact.
Exactly. They carried that profound trauma with them in a literal jar. But because they were excluded from traditional family structures and couldn't pass on inherited wealth, the emperors trusted them implicitly.
I think this completely shatters a really common modern assumption. Today, we tend to look back and just assume that eunuchs were always these marginalized, helpless victims.
Right, that they had no agency.
Yeah. But by voluntarily giving up their biology, these men in China actually hacked the system.
They did.
They bypassed the traditional aristocracy entirely. They became the guardians of the imperial treasury, the commanders of armies, the chief advisors. I mean, they were the most powerful political insiders in the entire empire.
They were, but, and this is important, that immense power was almost always balanced on a knife's edge of deep trauma, resentment, and isolation.
That makes sense.
Which brings us to a historical account that perfectly encapsulates the really dark, cyclical violence of this whole trade, and that is the revenge of Hermotimus.
Oh, man. I read this account from the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, and it honestly reads like a modern psychological thriller.
It really does. So Herodotus tells the story of Panionius of Chios. He was essentially a human trafficker.
A horrible guy.
Yeah. He amassed this massive fortune by capturing beautiful young boys, castrating them, and selling them into the black market as luxury commodities for the Persian courts.
And one of those boys was Hermotimus.
Ex-
He gets mutilated, sold off, and enters the Persian court. But instead of just fading away, Hermotimus is brilliant. Over decades, he rises through the ranks and achieves incredible power and influence as a favored royal eunuch.
A huge success story in a way.
Right, and then years later, he actually manages to cross paths with Panionius, the exact man who mutilated him when he was a child.
And Hermotimus doesn't just, have him killed by guards.
No, he plays a long, twisted psychological game.
He greets Panionius warmly. He actually thanks him, claiming that Panionius's actions were what set him on the path to greatness.
Which is just so manipulative.
He lures the merchant and his entire family in with promises of wealth, government contracts, and mutual prosperity.
He gets them completely comfortable. And once he has them trapped on his own turf, the trap just snaps shut. Hermotimus forces Panionius to castrate his own 4 sons.
It's unbelievable.
And then, once the merchant has mutilated his own children, Hermotimus forces the bleeding sons to castrate their father.
It is a horrifying narrative, truly, but it illustrates the deep, completely unresolved psychological trauma harbored by those who were subjected to this.
It wasn't just a political tool.
No, it shows us that beneath all the silk robes and the bureaucratic power, the fundamental violation of bodily autonomy carried a catastrophic psychological cost.
It really does. But moving through these illustrations, we see it wasn't just about secular power or money or revenge. Looking at this next set of historical records, we see castration used as a profound tool for spiritual power, too.
Yes, this is where we move completely away from the bureaucracy of empires and look at individuals who are seeking to transcend the human binary of male and female, specifically to access the divine.
Let's look at this illustration from ancient Rome, specifically around 204 BCE. This depicts the cult of Cybele.
Right.
Cybele was a Phrygian mother goddess, and her priests were known as the Galli. And the rituals they performed, they are almost hard to fathom today.
The historical texts describe these incredibly intense, frenzied street celebrations. This wasn't a sterile surgical procedure in a quiet room.
No.
Men, whipped into an absolute psychological and religious frenzy by the music, the crowds, and the whole atmosphere of the ritual, would voluntarily castrate themselves right in the streets.
And they didn't use scalpels either. The accounts say they used sharp shards of pottery or just jagged rocks they found by the side of the road.
It was a chaotic, very public spectacle of sacrifice.
And then, the ritual required them to run through the streets, bleeding, and throw their severed genitals through the open door or window of a nearby house.
Which I know sounds completely bizarre to a modern ear.
Yeah, why would they do that? Was it just for the shock value?
No, not at all. It was actually considered a legally binding religious contract. Whichever household the genitals landed in was then legally and religiously required to provide the new priest with female garments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, By throwing the organ into a home, the priest was forcing the broader community to actively participate in and acknowledge his transition. Receiving those garments marked their official entry into the priesthood of the goddess.
It's a radical, completely permanent physical commitment to a spiritual ideal. And this isn't just ancient Roman history either. If we look at South Asia today, places like India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan, we see the Hijra community.
Yes. The Hijras are individuals assigned male at birth who worship the Hindu goddess Bahuchara Mata.
Why?
They live in these tight-knit, highly structured congregations called gharanas, which are led by elder teacher figures known as gurus.
And within this community, for many, though definitely not all, a castration ceremony is performed. But this is entirely different from the Byzantine or Chinese models we talked about.
Yeah.
It is viewed as a direct, literal sacrifice of male biology to the goddess.
Exactly. And in exchange for that sacrifice, they are believed to receive immense religious power. Specifically, they gain the ability to broker favor with the divine.
Because they exist outside the normal binary.
Right. They step outside the standard human experience, occupying this sacred third space, which gives them the spiritual authority to bestow bodhi, which are powerful blessings, or, alternatively, to cast curses regarding fertility and prosperity at births and weddings.
Think about that for a second. Think about how tightly our modern society clings to strict gender binaries. We put absolutely everything in a pink box or a blue box.
Very true.
How does learning about ancient and continuous cultures that actively carved out a third spiritually elevated space and backed it up with such a permanent physical commitment challenge your own assumptions about gender? It really makes you pause.
It absolutely forces a profound reevaluation of how fluid culture and rigid biology interact. However, we do have to look at the modern realities for the Hijras.
Yeah, it's not all spiritual reverence today.
No. As these South Asian societies modernize, urbanize, and honestly become less strictly religious, the traditional demand for those ceremonial blessings has sharply declined.
Right? Today, they face severe marginalization. The contemporary reports we have show really high rates of police harassment, social exclusion, and just crushing poverty.
It's tragic.
Many are pushed into incredibly risky survival strategies, like sex work or begging on trains.
Yet, despite all of that societal rejection, their internal structure provides incredible resilience. They find deep support within their gharanas. Many Hijras take up highly respected social work, providing school books and food to children in their wider communities.
They're actively fighting to carve out a place of respect through civic service.
Exactly.
But, tracing this history from ancient priests to modern marginalized communities brings up a massive question for me. As the spiritual and imperial significance of these individuals began to fade over the centuries, what happened to the actual physical reality of their bodies?
The medical reality of this practice is staggering, and it's something we really often gloss over in history books. For most of history, castration was incredibly dangerous. When you sever the major blood vessels that feed the reproductive organs, you're cutting vessels that are held under natural tension.
Meaning the moment they are cut, they act like a snapped rubber band. They immediately retract back up into the abdominal cavity.
Exactly, which made it incredibly difficult for ancient surgeons to locate and close those wounds. Without modern surgical clamps or cauterization techniques, countless individuals simply bled to death internally.
There are illustrations in these records of ancient Roman castration clamps. They look like terrifying pliers, but they were specifically designed to clamp down and hold those blood vessels in place just long enough for the surgeon to sear them shut with a hot iron.
It's gruesome, and because the mortality rate was so terrifyingly high, and because survivors were frequently disowned by their families or enslaved thousands of miles from their homelands, castrates historically had to rely entirely on each other.
They basically invented their own social safety nets. We have records of wealthy eunuchs in places like China and the Byzantine Empire, pooling their resources and endowing entire monasteries.
Yes.
They did this specifically to ensure that they and their fellow eunuchs would have a safe, secluded place to grow old, receive specialized medical care, and eventually get a proper burial according to their specific cultural rites.
But, out of all that historical medical trauma came a highly unexpected scientific legacy. From the 18th to the 20th centuries, as medicine became formalized and professionalized, European doctors began to systematically study the bodies of living castrates.
Why? What were they looking for?
They really wanted to understand the systemic bodily changes, They noticed that castrates exhibited specific physiological traits. They lacked facial hair, their voices didn't drop, and fascinatingly, their long bones, like in their arms and legs, continued to grow longer than average because the growth plates never fused.
Right, because testosterone is the chemical signal that tells bone plates to close after puberty. But they didn't know about testosterone yet.
Exactly. But by studying these specific physical anomalies, early doctors began to connect the dots. They realized that removing the testes didn't just affect reproduction, it actually altered the entire chemical messaging system of the human body.
So this was the birth of modern endocrinology.
It was. That foundational research studying how the absence of these organs affected everything from bone density to vocal cords is exactly what gave modern medicine the ability to understand hormones.
Which is incredible when you think about the modern applications. That ancient, brutal practice inadvertently laid the scientific groundwork that allows doctors today to treat intersex conditions, to provide safe and effective hormone replacement therapies for trans individuals,
Yes.
and even to develop life-saving chemical castration treatments for aggressive prostate cancer.
It is a complex, undeniably valuable scientific legacy, but this also raises a really important point because the 19th and 20th centuries also saw this medical knowledge take a horrifyingly dark turn.
Yeah. This is where we see the practice move completely out of the imperial courts and the religious temples, and it gets co-opted by state-sponsored medical and penal systems.
This is the era of the eugenics movement and social Darwinism. Modern states began using forced sterilization and castration as a brutal mechanism of social control, aimed at what they horrifyingly termed racial hygiene.
It completely shifted from being a tool to create safe servants for an emperor to a weapon used to aggressively erase marginalized communities. For example, in the post-Civil War American South, historical records document how castration frequently accompanied the lynching of black men.
It's horrific.
It was weaponized as a terroristic warning, a simultaneous punishment, and an act of profound racial violence.
The physical act remained the exact same, but the power dynamic completely inverted. And right in the middle of this modern shift, the psychological and linguistic understanding of castration changed too.
Right, and we can trace that directly to Sigmund Freud.
Yes. In 1908, Freud introduced his psychoanalytic theory of castration anxiety. Now, historically, as we've seen in every single culture we've discussed today, castration almost exclusively referred to the removal of the testicles, the loss of reproduction, the loss of hormones.
The actual biological function.
Right. But Freud's theory fundamentally equated the concept of castration with the loss of the penis.
He shifted the entire cultural focus. Suddenly, the penis became the modern cultural crux of masculine privilege and power.
He completely changed the vocabulary of psychology.
So when we use the word castration metaphorically today, like if you hear someone say, oh, his boss really castrated him in that board meeting, we are unconsciously channeling Freud's framework of lost phallic power rather than the ancient 3,000-year reality of lost fertility and lost legacy.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? When we step back and look at this massive timeline, it forces a realization about the male body. I mean, we are culturally conditioned through movies and media to view the male body as this impenetrable, resilient armor.
Totally.
But this deep dive shows that historically, the male body has actually been incredibly fragile, deeply vulnerable to the whims of empires, religions, and governments who wanted to biologically engineer control.
That is the crucial takeaway. We've traced this all the way from the agricultural fields of the Stone Age, where early farmers first applied the logic of animal husbandry to human prisoners.
Right.
Through the deeply psychological dynastic revenge in the Persian courts, to the sacred binary-breaking street rituals of ancient Rome and modern South Asia, and finally to the medical birth of endocrinology and the horrific eugenics programs of the 20th century.
It is an unbelievable, just sprawling historical arc.
And it forces us as modern citizens to think critically about authority. Like, who has the power to dictate bodily autonomy? When a state or a prevailing ideology decides that it needs to alter the physical bodies of its citizens to maintain order or purity or control, the historical precedent we've examined today is chilling.
It really is. Which leaves you, listening right now, with one final, unexamined thought to mull over. For over 3 millennia, leaders used the crude, brutal tool of physical castration to biologically engineer safe, controllable humans who fit the exact economic and political needs of the state.
Yeah.
Today, as we enter an unprecedented era of advanced genetic engineering, CRISPR technology, and sophisticated biohacking, are we truly past the desire to biologically alter human beings to fit the needs of the system? Or have we just found cleaner, less visible, microscopic ways to do exactly the same thing?
A very profound question to end on. Thank you for exploring these historical records with us.
Thanks for coming on this deep dive. Take care, and keep questioning the history you think you know.